Well, hello out there, everyone. It is Saturday, September 21st, 2024, and this is Political Dharma with Alan Zundel. The contours of the presidential election are becoming very clear now as the states across the nation make their final determinations about who is or isn't going to be on their ballots, and court cases involving ballot access challenges are starting to become resolved with no higher court of appeal able to be taken advantage of. So today I will be giving a brief overview of how it looks as far as alternative presidential candidates being on the ballot, that is, independent and minor party candidates, which ones have significant coverage on ballots across the states. And since I already talked earlier this week, I think, about getting 5% of the vote and how unlikely that is because it rarely happens. Hasn't happened that any candidate other than a major party candidate has gotten more than 5% of the vote since Ross Perot in 1996. A bunch of obstacles to that. I'll be talking about whether it's still possible for there to be a contingent election in November. And also, I have a few announcements at the end about events that you could take advantage of online and a correction to one of my earlier stories. So that's kind of the lay of the land today. I have been following ballot access struggles, and it was interesting to see how independent candidate Robert F. Kennedy Jr. was doing in his plan to get on all 50 of the state's ballots, including the District of Columbia as well. But since he started pulling himself off ballots, he's not going to be covered as much. That was the driver of a lot of the show's reports. So I'm not going to be focusing too much on ballot access anymore, but I will give briefly a couple of highlights from this week's decisions in the courts, and then take a look at how the race overall looks. Okay, and I have been nudged from time to time by a viewer to tell the story of Harry Truman and Thomas Dewey. I think his name was Thomas Dewey in 1948. Even though I'm going to give some sense of how the election looks, it's good to keep in mind that you never know how it's going to turn out. Now, in 1948, there was a presidential election, and incumbent Harry Truman, who had become president after Franklin Roosevelt died in office, elevating Truman, who was then vice president, to the office of president. There was an election subsequent, and the media fully expected him to lose to Republican Dewey. But as you see in this pretty famous photo, he is happily holding up a morning newspaper saying that Dewey defeats Truman, and the joke was on the media because actually it was Harry Truman who won that election. So the point of the story is you never know. Of course, public opinion polling has come a long way since 1948, but they still do make mistakes, as we saw in 2016 and other elections. 2016, they all expected Hillary Clinton to win the election, and even though she got more votes in the popular vote, still Donald Trump won in the Electoral College. So you just never know how it's going to turn out. I'm going to say that it looks like it's going to be a very close election between Kamala Harris and Donald Trump, but it may turn out to be much more of a landslide, one or the other, especially in the Electoral College, because it only takes a few votes in a state to swing the entire Electoral College vote in that state to the other candidate. But let's take a look first at some of these cases in the courts now. Robert F. Kennedy Jr. was trying to get on the ballot in New York, and a federal judge refused to put them on the ballot. But this morning, this was in my email, the Team Kennedy and the PAC, American Values 2024, is taking it to the Supreme Court to see if they can get the U.S. Supreme Court to give an emergency injunction getting Kennedy on the ballot in New York. If this fails, New York will be the only state that has just two candidates on the ballot for president, that is the Democrat Harris and the Republican Trump. Now, in Michigan, it was an opposite situation where Kennedy was trying to get his name off the ballot, and a federal judge there ruled against Kennedy once again, saying that he asked to remove his name too late. 90% of the ballots were already printed, plus the Natural Law Party, which had nominated Kennedy to the ballot, said it was too late for them to nominate another presidential candidate, so they were against Kennedy taking his name off the ballot. Meanwhile, Jill Stein and the Green Party had a case that they took to the Supreme Court this week, and it was a very egregious example of how states can discriminate against minor party candidates. The Secretary of State in Nevada had given them the wrong forms to use as signature gathering petitions. And not only that, but they originally had a different form, and the Secretary of State said, no, you need to use this form, and gave them the wrong form, and then disqualified all those signatures from getting them on the ballot because it was the wrong form. So they took it to the Supreme Court, and this week the U.S. Supreme Court refused to hear the case, leaving the Nevada case, or maybe it was federal court, I don't recall, but the last decision was to not put her on the ballot. I think it was the Nevada Supreme Court, which means that they will not be appearing on the ballot in that swing state, even though they did gather all the signatures they needed. And one of the significant things here is how the U.S. Supreme Court, when it heard the Trump versus Anderson case earlier this year, when the Colorado State Supreme Court said that it was okay to take Trump off the ballot, the U.S. Supreme Court said, no, put him on the ballot because we can't have a patchwork across the nation of who is and isn't on the ballot. Obviously, that only applies to major party candidates because they don't give a hoot about, to use the polite term, about whether or not minor party candidates are on some ballots and not others, creating the kind of patchwork they said they were against. One final ballot access decision that I thought was interesting, and this was in Florida. The Secretary of State there actually ignored the law that said that qualified parties can't be on the ballot for president unless they're either recognized by the Federal Election Commission as a national committee or unless they submit a petition of 1%. Yet they put the presidential nominees of the Socialism and Liberation Party and the American Solidarity Party on the ballot. Neither of those parties had submitted a petition to get on the ballot, and neither had a recognized national committee. So the Florida Secretary of State just ignored their own law to put two minor parties on the ballot. Why would they do that? Well, if you look down there further in this story from the Ballot Access News that is on your screen if you're watching in video, in 2016, the Secretary of State enforced the law when the Independent Party tried to nominate Evan McMullin. Now, the significance of that is that McMullin was a Republican running against Donald Trump in 2016. So it looks like the Florida Secretary of State is going to just put candidates on the ballot who may possibly be in competition for votes with Kamala Harris, whereas in the past, if a candidate was in competition for votes with Donald Trump, they knocked him off the ballot. So disregarded the law in favor of your own party. That's the way it looks anyway. So finally, how do things look? And I don't think it's going to change much from here on in, so won't be looking at the picture too much. If you look at the totals here, there's really only two candidates that are covered in most of the states and likely to have much of an impact on the election in terms of the total number of votes across the nation. CO in the visual there is Chase Oliver, the candidate of the Libertarian Party. They're going to be on almost all the ballots across the nation. That's 47, one of them being the District of Columbia, so they are missing, 4 states they were not able to get on the ballot in, of course, New York being one of those. But Chase Oliver, surprisingly, was able to get his name on the ballot of all the Libertarian Party state nomination processes. Some of the states were threatening to put a different candidate on the ballot, including Robert F. Kennedy Jr. in Colorado. But as it ended up, Oliver and his forces were able to get his name on every Libertarian ballot line across the nation, as far as I can tell. Anyway, I think that's true. 47 states, or 46 states, and the District of Columbia. And the Green Party candidate, Jill Stein, is also up there with 38 confirmed ballots across the states. I wasn't sure what word I was looking for. She's going to be at 38. So if Chase Oliver is almost all the states, I'd say Jill Stein is going to be on at least 3/4 of them, and there may be a few that are still to come, not including write-in ballots, which usually don't include very many people if they don't see the name on the ballot. And Robert F. Kennedy Jr. is up there too at roughly, how much would that be? 32 out of 51, I would say. I don't know, but Kennedy has been telling his supporters to vote for Donald Trump and taking his name off the ballot in a number of states. So that means that I wouldn't expect his vote total to be very high, even though there are people that are saying they're still going to vote for Kennedy, even though he's not asking for their vote because they don't want to vote for Donald Trump or Kamala Harris or anyone else. They're still going to vote for Kennedy. But I'm sure, and from what I can see in the comments on my videos, there is a split between people who are going to stick with voting for Kennedy, some who are going over to Kamala Harris, some are going over to Donald Trump, some are going over to other minor party candidates, and some are just not going to vote at all, or maybe write in Robert Kennedy. Oh, hard to tell. The rest of the candidates, none of them have gotten anywhere near half of the states. The highest one there, surprisingly, is Claudia de la Cruz of the Socialism and Liberation Party, which has a platform that's pretty far out there. So I wouldn't expect they get a very high number of votes across the nation, because it's going to be mostly people are very dedicated to traditional socialist ideas like nationalization of all major industries. So that's ballot access for this week. That's my, whoops, it looks like I was, anyway, here I am back again. So I did say last week that one of the significant things that a third party or independent candidate could do is if they got 5% or more of the national popular vote, they could potentially get funding to help pay for this year's general election, and 4 years from now, their party or themselves paying for another election. But given that Kennedy had the most potential to get a lot of votes, and he is saying vote for Donald Trump instead of me, it doesn't look to me like he'll be able to get that 5%. Again, remembering the Dewey Truman story, you never know. I don't want to be too confident in my predictions, but that's the way the race looks right now. So is it possible that any of those other candidates are going to have much of an effect? I'll leave that for a moment. First, I want to look at whether a contingent election is still possible. And as you may remember from an earlier video I did, if you were watching me very long ago, of course, the presidential race is not determined by the popular vote across the country, that is the vote totals of all the voters across the nation. It is determined in the Electoral College. So whichever candidate gets the most votes, I'm on the wrong slide here, I was about to switch over. Whichever candidate gets the most votes in a state, is that candidate's electors will get a place in the Electoral College. So you see on your map here, each state has a certain number of electoral votes. If a candidate wins the most votes in a particular state, all those electoral votes will go to that candidate. And that's how the Electoral College works. Now, what happens what happens in the county Electoral College? How do they determine a winner? Well, this depends on Article 2, Section 1 of the U.S. Constitution, as amended by the 12th Amendment to the Constitution. If you see it on your screen, it says, the electors shall meet in their respective states and vote by ballot for president and vice president. That is, the electors in the Electoral College, they'll get together and cast their votes after the voters have voted across the nation. Then the electors get their role to play, and they shall make distinct lists of all persons voted for as president. That's important. They're not making lists of all the candidates who had votes from the voters. They're just listing the candidates who had Electoral College votes. So as it doesn't seem anyone other than Kamala Harris or Donald Trump is going to get any electoral votes, because it would be very hard for one of these minor party or independent candidates, including Robert F. Kennedy Jr. now, to get the most votes in any particular state, even in a ranked choice voting state like Alaska or Maine. In Maine, Kennedy took his name off the ballot anyway, but none of them look like they're going to get a high enough percentage of the vote to come in first. So the only candidates that would be in play here would be the Republican and the Democrat. Looking a little further, person having the greatest number of votes for president shall be president if number be a majority of the whole number of electors. So if they do not get a majority of the Electoral College votes, no candidate is elected, and then it will go to the House of Representatives. Then from the persons having the highest numbers, not exceeding 3 on the list, that is the list of those who got Electoral College votes, so it would only be 2 in this case, most likely. Of those voted for president, House of Representatives shall choose immediately by ballot the president. In choosing the president, the vote shall be taken by states, the representation from each state having 1 vote. That is, the Congress people in a state first vote on which candidate they want to cast that state's vote to, and then all those votes are added up to find out who's going to be president. And down at the bottom, the Senate shall choose the vice president. Each of the senators get 1 vote. So it could turn out that if there is a contingent election, the most unusual case, that's unusual in itself, but the most unusual outcome would be they could pick one party's candidate as president, probably Donald Trump, because it looks like Republicans are going to dominate the House of Representatives, and it's possible the Democrats will dominate the Senate. So you could have a Republican president and a Democrat for vice president. That would be unusual, but you never know. Is that likely to happen this year? Well, the last time we even came close to a contingent election was in the year 2000, the race between George W. Bush and Al Gore. If you can see it, it says George Bush got 271 electoral votes and Albert Gore got 266, with 1 elector voting for somebody else or not voting, I believe. I think that's what happened. Every so often you have an elector in the Electoral College who decides to go off the reservation and vote in a way that they were not supposed to. But since there are, I forget, 538 electoral votes, half of that would be 269 electoral votes. So to get a majority, you have to get more than half, which would be at least 270 electoral votes. George W. Bush got 271. So if just 2 electors in the Electoral College had not voted for George Bush, this election would have become a contingent election. Even if they take those 2 votes and give them over to Al Gore, that would be 268 for Al Gore, 269 for George Bush, and 1 for somebody else, or 1 that wasn't cast. So it would go to the House of Representatives in that case. But it didn't happen because Bush got those 2 extra votes there. The map right now, this is from the website 270 to Win, and it shows all the states and whether or not they're leaning towards the Republicans, which would be red and pink states, or the Democrats, which would be blue and light blue states. And the states that are very closely matched would be the ones in tan. If you count up all the blue states, that is how many are going to vote most likely for Democrats, that would be 226 electoral votes. And on the Republican side, there would be 219. So that leaves the swing state votes, and they would total up to, let's see, 93 electoral votes. So how those electoral votes in the swing states go would determine whether or not there could be a contingent election, and how Politico, the online news magazine, did a calculation, and what they found was there are 3 possibilities for a tie in the Electoral College, depending on how the swing states go. The first one there you see on the list, Pennsylvania going red, Georgia, North Carolina going blue, Michigan going red, Arizona blue, Wisconsin and Nevada red. So there's 3 combinations of how those Electoral College votes might go that would result in a contingent election. Since there is no third party or independent candidate likely to get any Electoral College votes, this is really the only way that a contingent election could happen, is by a breakdown in the swing states that looks like one of these 3 combinations. And the chances of that are slim, but it's certainly within the realm of possibility. And that would be a kind of unfortunate circumstance from the standpoint of civil unrest, because it would be even more unclear how the president and vice president were determined, if that were to happen. But this year has been so unusual, it's hard to tell. So that contingent election is possible, doesn't look likely, but you never know. Probably those swing states votes will tend to go mostly for one or the other of the major party candidates, in which case we'll have a very decisive electoral college victory, even though most observers or most analysts think that it's going to be a very close race in the popular vote. So what kind of effect could the independent and minor party candidates have here, if any, if they're not going to be able to force a contingent election, and they're probably not going to get that 5% of the vote to give them a leg up in the next presidential cycle? What kind of impact could they have? Well, I would say the most plausible way that they could advance the cause of alternative candidates is by getting a higher than expected share of the vote, either one of the candidates getting a much higher share than expected, or in combination, all of those candidates getting a higher share of the total vote than expected. So let's give you a picture of the last 4 presidential elections. Now, I listed the Libertarian Party and the Green Party only because those are the 2 parties that have got the highest vote totals in almost all these presidential elections of the major, of the minor party candidates. And at the end there, the total alternative vote, that is including Libertarian Party, Green Party, and every other presidential candidate that is not a major party candidate. In 2008, the Libertarian Party got just 0.4% of the vote. Green Party got 0.12% of the vote, so even less. And the total alternative vote was 1.42. So very low overall in 2008. That was the first year that Obama was nominated to be president, and he won that race. So there's a lot of excitement among Democrats about Obama, and so very few of them, when people who are more independent-minded tended to lean towards voting for Obama, I think, and not to go for a other alternative candidate. In 2012, all these totals went up. Libertarian Party went from 0.4% of the vote to 0.99. That's twice as many, more than twice as many, almost a whole percentage point. I say a whole percentage point because 1% is pretty high for a minor party. Green Party went up from 0.12% to 0.36%. That's 3 times what they had in 2008. And the total alternative vote was just slightly higher at 1.74% of the vote. So they went up from 2008, probably because in 2012, Obama was now a known factor, and a lot of folks were disappointed in his performance, so they decided they were going to go elsewhere. In 2016, when it was Clinton versus Trump, the third party vote went up even higher. Libertarian Party got 3.28%. That's like about 3 times, more than 3 times what they had in 2012. And the Green Party went from 0.36 in 2012 to 1.07 in 2016. So that's about 3 times as much. And the total alternative vote jumped from 1.74% to 5.73%, which looks like about 3 times as much as well. So a jump of 3 times as much for each of those categories: Libertarian Party, Green Party, and the total alternative vote. And finally, this last presidential election in 2020, they all fell back again, going back to around where they were at 2012. In 2012, Libertarian Party fell from 3.28% to 1.18%. Green Party fell from 1.07 to 0.26, even worse than in 2012. In 2020, the Green Party had an exceptionally weak candidate in Howie Hawkins, whereas in 2012 and 2016, they had Jill Stein. And the total alternative vote fell from almost 6% to under 2% at 1.84%. So what I would be looking for this year to see if there's any advance in the alternative candidate vote would be whether the Libertarian Party or Green Party can get significantly higher than 1%, which would be, to my mind, like 3% or more. Somewhere between 3% and 5% would be significant and show that they are making progress once again, kind of regaining the lost momentum that they had up until 2020. And the total alternative vote, I would say, has to go above 5 or 6% to something more in the lines of 7, 8% to show a significant level of dissatisfaction with the major parties, enough to grab their attention and maybe cause them to, number one, the major parties might look for a change of direction in trying to get votes, but more likely, number two, voters will be more willing to take a serious look at minor party candidates if these candidates this year can show that they're able to do better than they have just recently. All right. So now I've got a couple of announcements and a correction. In future shows, I'm going to be doing a little less of the ballot access cases because there should be fewer decisions being made. And also, I don't think the overall composition of that ballot access across the country is going to change very much. I still think it'll be the Libertarian Party and Green Party having the widest representation. RFK, even though he's got over half the states in the bag, not everybody who supports Kennedy is going to vote for Kennedy, so I don't see a big impact there. Could be wrong. And the other parties, I don't think are going to make much of a dent unless the overall effect is very high. But I will be looking more at alternative voting methods because there are at least 5 states that have ranked choice voting measures or other measures. I think they're all ranked choice voting in combination in some states with what's called a unified primary. But there's going to be voting method reform measures in at least 5 states. We already have 2 states using ranked choice voting. One of those states has on the ballot this year, that is Alaska, to repeal their ranked choice voting law. So it's going to be interesting from the standpoint of voting reform, which has to happen if these third parties are going to get traction in the future. The more states that have alternative voting systems that allow people to show preference for more than one candidate and can free them from the sense that I need to vote for the lesser evil and ignore the little parties, the more we can go in that direction, the more chance these other candidates are going to have, the more competition there'll be in elections, the more people will be exposed to different points of view and be able to express their point of view more accurately, all those good things. So first of all, the alternative candidates are going to be in a debate by the sponsored by the Free and Equal Foundation. And Ballot Access News had a news item here. Okay, the Free and Equal Foundation debate, according to Ballot Access News, is set for October 23rd, a Wednesday evening between 5 and 7 p.m. Pacific time, that is out here on the coast. And I did not see that same date announced yet on the Free and Equal website, so I'm not sure if that's confirmed. This is according to Ballot Access News, but you may want to mark your calendar. You can go over to the Free and Equal Foundation website if you want to sign up for notices about this, and tune in that night if you want to hear some of these candidates speaking. They've confirmed, according to this article again, Chase Oliver of the Libertarian Party, Jill Stein of the Green Party, and Randall Terry of the Constitution Party, who were the 3 same candidates they had in their last debate back whenever that was, August or September, I think, maybe July even. I don't remember now. That's a candidate debate. Now, in talking about alternative election systems, I've mentioned star voting, which has been promoted primarily by the Equal Vote Coalition based in Oregon, and I have been involved in that, so full disclosure, I'm not part of the board or anything at this point, but I have been very much involved in this. They are going to be having a free online symposium next weekend on Saturday, September 28th from, Pacific time is 10:30 a.m. to 4 p.m. A number of panels with guests. They're going to try to cover ranked choice voting, star voting, approval voting, other ideas. So there'll be analysts, experts, advocates. So if you'd like to get up on what's happening in the area of voting reform, this would be a good event to attend. Again, it's free, and if you want to find their website, look for Equal Vote Coalition, equal.vote/EVS for Equal Vote Symposium would be the address that you would want to go to. And then a last thing is a correction I wanted to make. Now, back a few episodes ago, I had looked at the Suffolk University USA Today public opinion poll and noticed one item that I singled out, saying it was very strange because it looked like the second choice of a lot of voters in the presidential election was Cornel West. Now, I was corrected by one of my viewers, and I forgot to mention this in the video after that one. I should have corrected it earlier. But just recently, the West campaign made the same mistake. Here they sent out an email heralding that poll and saying, look here, when the voters were asked for their second choice for president, Cornel West came out with like 25% of the votes. So it looks like a quarter of the voters had Cornel West as their second choice. Kamala Harris as their about 32% of them said Kamala Harris. So Cornel West was in second place when it came to voters' second choice. But as this viewer pointed out, what I missed on that survey was that question 10 asked their first choice in the vote, and then question 11 says at the top here for 10.3 to 10.5. Now that's referring to the previous 10th question. Point 3 would be Green Party candidate Jill Stein. So it's the third choice of the 10th question. So 10.3 to 10.5 would be Jill Stein, Cornel West, and Chase Oliver. So what the 11th question is actually asking is, of those who voted for Stein, West, or Oliver as their first choice, what would their second choice be? Now, that makes a lot more sense, that a lot of those voters who already chose a third-party candidate would go to another minor candidate like Cornel West. So that was just a very small sample of the overall voter base that did that, and it made a difference in a lot of ways. The commenter, I don't know the actual name, but this was at 0165 capital E capital M 4971. I don't know who that is, but thanks to that person, they looked at the polling data, told me that, look, question 11 is referring back to question 10, and they made a little analysis there, says that it looks like 5/7 of Oliver's supporters chose Trump as their second choice. The rest of the data is indeterminable, but I would think that mostly Jill Stein, people who chose Jill Stein as their first choice would then choose Cornel West as their second choice, and vice versa. So that's probably why Cornel West is coming in high, because there are a lot of Jill Stein as first choice, more than there were for Cornel West as first choice. Well, that's it for this week. I hope you got something out of that. And next week, I'm going to be taking a closer look, I think, unless something comes up that throws this off the table, but I'm going to be taking a closer look at the states where voting reform is on the table. I said table twice, must like the word. I live near La Mesa, which means the table. Okay, I'm it's spinning now. So next week, I'm going to look at the states where voting reform is on the ballot. And as I said, you can go look at that Equal Vote Symposium and learn something about this ahead of time. And I will be looking at that going forward. I'm going to, when the returns come in November, which is just a little over a month away. In fact, I'll be getting my ballot in a couple of weeks. I'll be looking at all that stuff, like how the race turned out overall, and how the presidential race, that is, how the ballot reform, the voting reform initiatives did, how the minor party candidates did, and votes in the swing states. I'll be doing all that as we get closer to that, or immediately after that. So keep following if you're interested in this with me, and that's where I'm heading. I hope you come back. I'm appreciative of everybody that watches, everybody that comments, everybody that likes and subscribes and has stayed with me. That's it for today. Bye for now, and maybe again next week. Bye.
With ease, I see the chains are breaking. We gained our focus, the moves we're making will prove to determine our self-worth as a passenger on this vehicle Earth.